we have to link the contents of some of the contents of the book, our own experiences, right? And what we have done in this course before this particular segment together to make sense of gardening, not per se, but gardening in its relationship with the main emphasis of the course. Right? And also in relation to education. Right. And I think the way that we can do that is before we get to the contents of the well gardened mind. And then when we do that, we can introduce to Stuart Smith as well and just talk a little bit about the book. I think you can do that. But at this time, I think we can just maybe talk about gardening a little bit in terms of your own experience of it. Why, what attracts you to gardening, without any reference to the course or um, education, but your own passion for gardening, where it comes from, and how it gives meaning to your own endeavors. I think that's important for the students to also hear about.
Sir, honestly, like
Hmm.
I always felt driven towards gardening and spending time with animals. During my childhood, mostly spending time with animals, but as I grew up, I started developing a sense for gardening as well. और तब मुझे नहीं पता था कि why is that so. मुझे सिर्फ ये पता था कि ये पौधे होते हैं और ये फूल होते हैं और ये उगते हैं और ये अच्छे लगते हैं. जो वो जो मिरेकल है इन सिंपलेस्ट थिंग्स, जो कि बाद में मैंने यूनिवर्सिटी में आके टैगोर जैसे और टॉलस्टॉय जैसे और इवन जैसे आपने बताया हरमन हेस की भी तमाम नॉवेल्स में मुख्तलिफ जगह पे इस तरह की एग्जाम्पल्स मेटाफर्स मिलते हैं अबाउट फाइंडिंग द मिरेकल इन द मंडेन. I would like to phrase it that way.
Hmm. Hmm.
तो
Miracle in the mundane. Huh.
जी, तो उस and it certainly, I think it goes back to the dullness of our urban lives that we have surrounded ourselves with, that particularly drives or draws us towards uh, something even so small as a pot that's on our window. लोग अब ये कहेंगे कि अब खिड़की पे अगर एक छोटा गमला भी हम रख सकें तो रख लें. तो मेरा ख्याल है कि when we talk about gardening, the discussion should start from that wonderment, from that bewilderment that one feels inherently about nature if we let the reins of our feelings free. बचपन से मुझे गार्डनिंग का शौक था. मुझे उसके बारे में कोई एक्स्ट्रा चीज फील नहीं होती थी. और बड़े होके मुझे ऐसा लगता है डॉक्टर स्टुअर्ट स्मिथ को स्पेशली पढ़ने के बाद कि जो हमारे इर्द
Hmm.
गिर्द का फिजिकल वर्ल्ड है उसके अंदर एक इनहेरेंट एज इफ मेटाफिजिक्स इज प्लेइंग अराउंड, जो कि हमारे एक कॉन्शियस कोलैबोरेशन के थ्रू अनफोल्ड होती है. और मुझे ऐसा इसलिए महसूस होता है क्योंकि वो सर्टेन मीनिंग्स हमेशा कुछ सर्टेन सर्कमस्टांसेस में सर्टेन मीनिंग्स क्रिएट करेगी. जैसे अगर आप उसको बहुत ज्यादा कंट्रोल करने की कोशिश करेंगे तो उसके फिजिकल इम्पैक्ट्स, उसका फिजिकल कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस भी बहुत बुरे होंगे कि बायोडाइवर्सिटी मरना खत्म हो जाएगी, एक मोनोकल्चर डेवलप होना शुरू हो जाएगा जैसे फार्मिंग में होता है. और it perfectly makes sense why Bible has like portrayed tilling as a punishment for mankind. और टिलिंग को अगर हम एज अ
What as a
मेटाफर,
punishment? Sorry, say
टिलिंग,
that again.
Eve's
Hmm.
punishment was different, but Adam's punishment was that he will till the land. And if you
Hmm.
take it as a metaphor and try to apply it, on the whole of modern world. So it reminds me of a movie. It's called There Will Be Blood. बड़ी मशहूर मूवी थी. आई थिंक द मेन एक्टर ऑफ द मूवी आल्सो गॉट एन ऑस्कर. और वो एक्टर जो है, इंटरेस्टिंगली, ही हैज ओनली appeared in like 5 to 6 movies. वो कोई रेगुलर एक्टर नहीं है. He selects the movies first and then he acts in them. वो हर मूवी में एक्ट नहीं करता. तो देयर विल बी ब्लड इज अ मूवी अबाउट a person who is a petroleum engineer. और वो अपनी अमेरिका में जो रिग्स बहुत ज्यादा बनाता है. बिल्कुल एक आदमी से शुरू होता है, खुद पेट्रोल ढूंढता है, कुआं खोदता है, कुएं से शुरू होता है, और उसकी फिर पूरे अमेरिका में रिग्स होती हैं. लेकिन उसको उसको अगर हम एक लार्जली उसका एनालिसिस करें तो एवरी इंडस्ट्रियल परस्यूट इज लाइक टिलिंग द लैंड. सो मार्क जुकरबर्ग, after conquering the world, is doing the exact same thing that a farmer or like a peasant has been doing for thousands of years. तो आपके सामने मैं ये बातें कर सकता हूँ क्योंकि आप इस पे हंसते नहीं हैं. लेकिन जब भी ये बात, मतलब कि इसको क्लीशे समझा जाता है कि यार ये क्या बात है, इसमें कोई कोई मजा नहीं आया. आई थिंक the way it's looked at in the biblical tradition, and perhaps Aristotle will also agree with it, कि intervention is necessary. But intervention in the form of a responsibility, in the form of a collaboration with nature, rather than a hegemonical capture of it.
So what is
Like
tilling? Tilling is not intervention. Tilling is the hegemonic
yes,
aspect of it is tilling, right?
tilling is the wiping out of all biodiversity, all flora and fauna, and creating a space of your own where you can select what kind of plant and how much will grow there.
So one of the very, very clear, modern representation of it, I think, of what you're saying is, ये Islamabad के पास, the moment you get out of Islamabad, there's a road that's called Park Road. उसके आगे जाकर ना, there's a Park View Housing Society. वो जिस जगह पे उन्होंने प्लॉट बनाए हैं ना, वो बड़ा अनइवन, एक हिली ग्राउंड्स थे, राइट. उसके आगे कुछ एक ऐसी जगह है जहाँ पे वो नेवल फार्म हाउस इस तरह की सोसाइटी है, वेयर इफ यू गो देयर दे हैव मेंटेन्ड द ले ऑफ द लैंड व्हिच इज वेरी स्लोपी एंड अनइवन एंड सो ऑन. But the moment you get into this particular society, it's all tilled, flattened for the plotting purposes, right? And so, in some ways, that's the sort of hegemony where you distort the shape of the earth, right?
Yes,
Is
yes.
is is what is being built here, right?
और जब
Yeah.
हम गार्डनिंग करते हैं तो उसमें तो उसका बहुत एक फिजिकल डिटेल होती है ना, कि when you're not tilling the land, when you're not clearing off the leaves and the debris over the soil, it's producing useful nutrients for the soil which make it more lightweight, and it becomes like useful for growing plants, and plants can grow through it themselves. You don't have to do anything extra. But when you clean off
अच्छा,
all the
चलें इसको
debris. Yeah. जी सर.
स्लाइटली डिफरेंटली अगर हम देखने की कोशिश करें इन रिलेशन टू ऑल्सो व्हाट वी आर लुकिंग एट इन द कोर्स. Let me put it like this. When we say tilling को हम relate कर सकते हैं with excessive control,
Yes.
right? And the lack of it is also not what one is talking about, right? So there is a zero control and then there is an excessive control, right?
जी.
Which in some ways mirrors the Aristotelian emphasis on the golden mean, right? Where, if you recall, the virtue was seen as a path in the middle between the excess and on one hand and the deficiency or deficit on the other hand. So एक्सेसिव कंट्रोल का डेफिसिट इन द केस ऑफ लैंड वो होगा क्या कि आप उसको बिल्कुल ही झाड़ झंकार और खुला छोड़ दें, सो डोंट डू एनीथिंग विद इट, राइट, विच विल which will be the opposite of excessive control. Is that would that be a correct understanding of our
That will
relationship
be
with land
opposite.
between
Yes,
zero
that
control
will
and
be
excessive control?
yes, that will be opposite of excessive control, but that will not be the ideal control to be a gardener. Like that will not be what a gardener would do. That
So
will be
gardener
that
must
some, yeah.
must. Hmm.
Ji sir.
So the gardener must develop a relationship with the land,
Yes, that's important.
and that relationship is a harmonious relationship that lets the nature be
Yes,
without distorting it in any ways, right? And
yes,
so, in some
certainly.
ways, what we are seeing here is that that would be a virtue, you know, a
That
virtue
would
in
be
the
a
sense
virtue.
which Aristotle has also described it. ये एरिस्टोटल मुझे कभी कभी लगता है कि ये भी कोई शायद कोई बड़ा बंदा था, मतलब बड़ा बंदा तो था ही, लेकिन यू नो क्योंकि जो बात वो कर गया उसको हम मुख्तलिफ जगहों पे उसका इतलाक जो है बहुत खूबसूरती से होता हुआ नजर आ जाता है.
Ji sir.
So
Or sir, I think
a gardener then would be a virtuous person.
he will be. And
And
here
and
I would like to add that it's important to contrast what we're talking about in Aristotelian terms. It's important to contrast it with the way you made a differences chart between J.S. Mill and Aristotle. So, a gardener being a
Mhm.
virtuous person, he or she is not trying to maximize his or her happiness. That virtue is not achieved when you're only trying to maximize your happiness, whether it, whether in the
Mm.
qualitative or quantitative terms, because in order to be that virtuous person, in order to be in that harmony with nature, you have to endure periods of waiting, uh, pain, sometimes even wrath. So you have to go
Wrath.
through all those feelings.
Hmm. 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 Those are very human feelings, of course. And so,
Yes.
any instances of how a garden goes through these emotions? Any concrete instances of a garden going through these
So for example,
emotions in the process of gardening?
if we take patience, when a gardener is sowing seeds, that is the time when a gardener is most anxious. You have put the seed inside the soil and you don't know what's going to happen with it. You don't know whether the seed is fertile or infertile. You don't know that if it's sprouted, the next day rain or storm won't come and destroy it. You don't know that. And so until it's big enough to sustain itself, that is at least a period of 1.5 week, 2 weeks for some plants, even longer than that. That anxiety is going to stay with you, but that anxiety is
So, in
is
some,
not completely like destroying you mentally. It's teaching you lessons. It's making you grow as a person.
in some ways, I see connections with Goddard here as well. If you recall, we talked about the illusion of control.
Yes.
Uh, an illusion of control that shapes our perceptions and can make us unhappy, because if we think we are in control always, or expect our control to be there and it isn't, it frustrates us. And so, in some ways, what I see you saying is that the garden keeps challenging our illusion of control on the nature.
Yes.
Would that be? Hmm?
And then also it's this illusion of control is complemented by another illusion जिसकी मैंने आपसे जिक्र किया था, the infantile omnipotence, which is a psychological concept which
Hmm.
Sue Stewart also expounds upon in her book, जिसमें वो कहती हैं कि जैसे एक बच्चा है, for the child, for the mother, what it actually is कि the mother is taking care of the child, लेकिन for the child has created the mother. बच्चे के लिए ऐसे है कि उसने माँ को पैदा किया है, वो माँ के साथ इस तरह इंटरेक्ट करता है. या हम किसी छोटे बच्चे को देखें तो वो कोई छोटी सी चीज उठा के अपनी आंखें उठा के हमारी तरफ देखता है कि अब ये मुझे अप्रिशिएट करेंगे कि मैंने बहुत बड़ा काम कर दिया. So that is infantile omnipotence. So a part of that is also very important in terms of keeping our hopes high about the positive outcomes in life. And that is only possible when you are in harmony with your surroundings, when you are one with nature or with society. मेरा ख्याल है आप इस पे रहनुमाई कर सकते हैं कि maybe we can also draw parallels along Viktor Frankl's logotherapy in it. क्योंकि लोगोथेरेपी पे बहुत बड़ा इल्जाम लगता है कि मीनिंग सब्जेक्टिव होता है, जिसकी वजह से कि इस साइकोलॉजी में इसकी कोई ऑब्जेक्टिव वैल्यू नहीं है लोगोथेरेपी की. लेकिन दिस कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ इन्फेंटाइल omnipotence and coupling it with the illusion of control, I think, had Viktor Frankl not have that illusion about getting his work published, getting out of the concentration camp alive, getting his work published and making it accessible for the people, and that imagination that it will change people's life, that can be, because it could have happened that Viktor Frankl perhaps would not have survived, but he did. While he was in the concentration camp, he was not sure whether he's going to survive. It was this illusion or this his imagination that he will survive. He will come out of that hellhole alive and he will publish his work and people will benefit from it. So that's also
ये
what's going
आप
on in a gardener's mind.
that the flowers will bloom ultimately,
They
that
will
there is an
bloom.
expectation that yes, the nature will in some ways reward that
She
illusion.
also mentions it. She mentions particular flowers. There are flowers who have seeds so small you cannot even pick them. You cannot sow them in seedling trays. You have to just spread them on the ground because they are so small to be even seen. And for about those seeds to imagine that in my garden these flowers will bloom,
Hmm.
that's a leap. That's a leap in imagination.
Well, that's a leap of imagination once, isn't it? Because that's something that you repeat over and over again in different cycles. So, would
Yes,
that imagination be renewed, or it's
it has to be
in some
renewed.
ways, does it become just as boring as anything else? I mean, what keeps the excitement alive in recurrent processes in as far as gardening is concerned, year after year?
I think it's the cycle of life. If I'm given unlimited access to my favorite ice cream brand for life, I'll not be excited about it. So I have to go out and work and earn money, and then from my monthly stipend I can save a little amount of money to eat that expensive ice cream. I'm just using it as an example. It's similar in the
Hmm.
in gardening as well. You have to go through tribulations. You have to face your fears. You have to sometimes even fail. Sometimes you grow flowers. Sometimes you grow plants and they don't flower because of whatever reasons. Because the soil was not right. Because the weather changed, especially when we're living in a climate apocalypse right now. You're never sure whether the flowers will grow until the day they
Hmm.
bloom.
Hmm.
And when the next there's something so marvelous about it. Okay, every year it's a new feeling, and every year it's the nostalgia that you start living for.
Oh, really?
कि
Okay.
आप जैसे when it's October is coming, you look forward to an
Hmm.
October, to the best October you've ever had with plants. वो उस अक्टूबर में मैंने बहुत बड़े बड़े हॉली हॉक्स उगाए थे। मुझे पर्सनली ऐसे फील होता है। एक दफा मेरे घर में बहुत सारे हॉली हॉक्स उग गए थे, और वो पूरा घर मेरा, ऊंचे ऊंचे वो पिंक कलर के फ्लावर्स होते हैं, बहुत ऊंचे हो जाते हैं, छोटे दरख्त जितने बन जाते हैं, उससे भर
हम्म
गया था। बट आई मेड अ मिस्टेक, आई स्प्रेड देम विद एन इंसेक्टिसाइड। तो वो 2-3 हफ्ते मेरे घर रहे, और बाद में मैंने उन्हें इंसेक्टिसाइडल स्प्रे कर दिया और वो मर गए। और उसके बाद मैंने 2-3 साल इस कोशिश में गुजारे कि वो 2-3 हफ्तों की जो बहार थी, वो मेरे घर 2 महीने के लिए आए। तो इट कीप्स यू ऑक्यूपाइड इन दैट वे,
हम्म।
adds meaning to your life, I
अच्छा,
would say.
मैं क्योंकि वो मेटाफॉर्स में बहुत ज़्यादा सोचता हूँ मोइस, और मुझे ये लग रहा है कि मैं, फॉर एग्जांपल, दिस कोर्स दैट वी आर ट्राइंग टू ऑफर एवरी ईयर, सो पिछली बार भी, ऑफ कोर्स इट्स द सेम गार्डन,
Exactly.
राइट?
Yes, sir.
Right. And so in some ways, it's also different because it is different,
It is. It is.
but it's also the
It's
same,
evolving.
right?
Yes.
And in if we think about it like that, so most of those activities that we have to undergo again and again and again, in some ways, this whole metaphor of gardening and the ways in which it can, as you have described, keep one's excitement and joy and that engagement, that dynamic engagement with the nature alive, can actually apply to a lot of activities, such as even offering a course again and again, or, it could be anything. It could be even day's work, that one keeps repeating day after day. In some ways, it also reminds me of the myth of Sisyphus. But this is not really the
Yes.
Sisyphus, right?
Yes.
Because
That's the
Sisyphus was,
difference.
yes, yes, yeah. So it's not that kind of an existential vacuum that one is. And that kind of brings me to Viktor Frankl back again. So I- I'm assuming, well, not assuming, my interaction, for example, with, one of the restorative gardeners that both of us went to, Naeem Saab, Naeem Bajwa Saab, उनसे मिल करके और उनसे गुफ्तगू करके मुझे ये बहुत ही एक वाज़े एहसास हो रहा था कि ही इज फुल ऑफ मीनिंग, ही इज गिवन दिस मीनिंग टू हिज लाइफ, ही इज इमर्स्ड in what we call restorative gardening, and the way he describes it is very comprehensive and holistic. For example, he knows कि सांप ने कब आना है, फिर सांप के पीछे न्योला आएगा, फिर मच्छर आएंगे, और मैंने खुद को बचाना है उन सब से, लेकिन उनके साथ मेस भी नहीं
Yes.
करना, right? So
Yes.
those processes of nature, I just let the nature be, and let the
Ji.
animals come and beat each other out. And meanwhile, मैं अपने इर्द गिर्द एक नेट लगा के बैठ जाऊंगा and watch the spectacle.
Yes.
So
So that's I think that's the
this
golden.
meaning, yeah.
Yes.
Hmm. Please go on, the golden mean, because I think you were going to bring together Aristotle and Viktor Frankl, in the same place. I had that feeling, but go ahead.
Yes, sir. I was exactly going to say that. Okay, so that's how that
Hmm.
golden mean is achieved. And he has certainly, when you meet him, you find out that it's the meaning that he has derived from uh, attending to his garden in that particular way that has helped him achieve that golden mean.
हम्म। अच्छा, अब ये एक और एक्सट्रीम है, यू सी, उनके आसपास ही हमने देखा था कि वो जो एक्सेसिव कंट्रोल, you could also see that just right next door, because बहुत से फार्म हाउस जो आपने देखे हैं जहाँ पे लोग वो those kind of gardeners where this metaphor of tilling will be a lot more applicable, right? क्योंकि आप उसको बहुत neatly carve out कर रहे हैं, and then you're doing things with the land which will make it look really beautiful, but in some ways has messed up with the essence of what it was all about.
And whether
ये
it
हमारे
will
इर्द गिर्द बहुत
really.
ज्यादा हो रहा है ना?
Ji, sir. I was just gonna say whether it will really, whether it can really qualify as beautiful is also, after all, subjective. They might call it beautiful, but I won't. So it's back.
Muiz, we will just begin from where we had left. We were talking about, we had already talked about two extremes. Um, and Gardner being on the virtuous path, which is to let the nature be, but intervene in a way which is harmonious, right? And
Yes.
that doesn't mess up with the necessary cycles of nature and so on. And we have seen an example in the restorative farming of Naeem Bajwa Sahab, right? But you have, what you see around is a very different kind of farming, especially which is manifest in the new farmhouse culture.
Yes.
How would we comment on that? And in what ways is that not really an expression of harmony and happiness that we are interested in for the purpose of this course?
Hmm. Sir, I think that it clearly is an invasion of natural spaces, in the sense that you're replacing a very biodiverse environment with the monoculture crops like grass. So you're erasing all the clovers and all the ground covers, and also it's covering earth on atmosphere on different levels. And obviously at each level there are animals who are inhabiting that space. And so unless you have that sense that you share this space with these other creatures, you cannot be in harmony with nature. And it's
Well, I
precisely
think that's a
because,
very important point.
gee,
Um, I think we need to dwell on it a little bit. This sharing of space with other creatures. And so the opposite of it is when you do that kind of farming that we're, which shows excessive control, is that it's not really sharing, it is exercising your control. It's keeping the snakes and
yeah,
the nulas away, right?
it's
And
a matter of it's a matter of maximizing utility.
maximizing utility as well, yes. So J.S. Mill and Jeremy Bentham are just right there, right? And it also kind of plays into the neoliberal stuff that we've been talking about in the class as well. I mean, in some ways, this kind of farming has been commodified
Yes.
more recently. It is a commodity.
And it's no
Okay.
surprise that lawns per se are
Hmm.
an American invention. Lawns were invented 100 years
Really, I didn't
back.
know that.
Yes, because even in the English gardens, they did have grass patches, but the grass patches
Hmm.
are always complemented by hedges. And those hedges traditionally had to encapsulate sort of a Christian symbolism. So
Hmm.
Europeans used to have these knot gardens where they'll make knots of hedges, and grass will just be there to fill spaces. But in America, it was lawns were invented in America just to give a message that, look, I have this lush green flat space in front of my house.
यार लेकिन हमारे चहार बाग जो हैं वो भी तो एक तरह की फिर वायलेंस ही है ना. That's also not
नहीं
really
sir,
sharing it. नहीं.
actually abhi jo recently the seminar by Taimur Khan Mumtaz that I attended,
Hmm.
he
Hmm.
explained the entire procedure for like the garden care. And I
अच्छा.
found out that those Mughals, they were experimenting and experimenting with and practicing the same methods and ideas of restorative gardening that we have now like more formally articulated uh,
अच्छा
in West.
अच्छा अच्छा.
तो वो उसी तरीके से पत्तों
Wonderful.
का
Wonderful.
और
Hmm.
और उसकी जो बायोडाइवर्सिटी है, ऑल ऑफ दैट बायोडाइवर्सिटी इट्स डॉक्यूमेंटेड इन तुस्के बाबरी
Hmm.
और वो जहांगीर के मेमोयर्स एंड ऑल ऑफ दैट, इट्स डॉक्यूमेंटेड. एंड दे मेड श्योर that all levels of atmosphere are covered and the garden is not just a space for humans, it was equally a space for all different kinds of birds and insects as it was for humans.
I think we need to speak more at some point about the Mughal gardens then. I'd really like
And
to
they
learn more about that because मुझे ये लगता है कि वो but they're also very well planned. But that, I mean,
yes,
plan is important, right? I mean, restorative gardening, maybe it's not that you go unplanned. I mean,
it's
it follows a
impossible
certain
without a
plan.
meticulous plan, and I would even say that because of the very reason that it requires a very meticulous plan is that people
Hmm.
are aversive towards it.
Hmm.
People
Hmm.
don't want
Hmm.
to do it because it's a lot of responsibility. You have to take
Hmm.
care of insects, you have to take care of birds, you have to take care of worms, and you have to take care of all sorts of plants and fertilizers. People don't want to do that.
Hmm. Hmm. So I think in just to recap, I think what we're getting at is एक तो बड़ी इंपॉर्टेंट चीज जो सामने आई है कि अगर आप अच्छे माली हैं तो आप हर सूरत एक वर्चुअस virtue you can't just be without virtue because you are following that middle path, um, and that is the
Yes.
path of restorative gardening as well.
Sir, I think
And
it
there
will
is
make a
also meaning in harmony and maintaining that harmony in the nature, of course gives a lot of meaning to your life because you have to struggle to maintain that, right? So Viktor Frankl or Aristotle, to we can see them right over there. um, there is an aspect of gardening that I think we need to understand a little more. I think one assumption that I see in Sue Stuart Smith is, well, not really an assumption. There is research to back that as well. Is that when you actually engage in gardening, so that something happens inside here as well,
yes.
right? And so, it has been the evidence is coming from the prisons, from the schools, that children or the prisoners who are working in a garden, maintaining a garden, in some ways are doing better in terms of your mental health, whatever indicators those are.
Yes.
Do you see that? Have you experienced that? I mean, I don't think that we have any evidence, that local evidence to support that. But of course, there is a lot of studying around gardening happening elsewhere, particularly in the West. सू की किताब में मैंने ये देखा था कि एक जगह पे ये लिखा हुआ था कि फॉर एवरी पाउंड दैट there was a proposal for NHS, the National Health Service of the UK, that for every pound that they would spend on gardening, that the government will spend on gardening, that they will save a lot of, I don't know what the amount was, pounds on
Yeah.
healthcare.
Yes.
That's fascinating.
I obviously I don't have local statistics for it, but I can share a personal example.
Mm, mm,
Ke
mm,
I feel it very strongly ke whenever I'm not in the right headspace, my
mm.
garden can my you can tell by just looking at my garden what's going on in my head. If there's
Really?
chaos, the days when I'm not in the right mental space, my garden is chaotic. Soil
Well,
is spread.
but that's telling me that what happens here has an effect on what you do in the garden, right?
Yes, and
What is the ulta effect? I'm trying to understand the reverse of it, what the garden does to you.
what the garden does
Not
to
what
you.
you do to the garden, but what the garden does to you in terms of, um, good things to the mind.
I think all of those human feelings that we began talking with, patience, wrath, brutality, kindness, whichever feeling you can think of, that comes in, like, it plays out in the garden. So when you're gardening, it's also honing your emotional intelligence. I think that's true.
अच्छा, यार बिल्कुल आप मेरे ख्याल में there's much to what you're saying, but I'm tempted to think that in some ways, again, I'm going into metaphors really, in that in some ways, the children's minds are also gardens, and the
Yes.
teachers also have to think like gardeners. I mean, excessive control in terms of teaching also does the same kind of tilling damage to the children minds that we've just talked about that can happen in the case of land, right? And so if you exercise excessive control in the classroom, bad idea, right? And people have been talking about that as well. And you can't also just let it be completely all by itself, right? And so, there is a path in the middle where you have to nurture the mind in a way that actually maintains its harmony and curiosity and the bewilderment that you mentioned to begin with. And so, in some ways, the parents and the teachers, and we also have to learn the tricks of the trade of the gardening, and in order to also then understand learning.
Yes, I think it perfectly fits into that metaphor.
So, in some ways, then our students, um, um, what I think the connection that I am really taking away from this conversation between you and me is it all began with the Aristotle, right? So that's what we did in the beginning of the course as well, that there's a path in the middle, right? And then, the most important thing about the Viktor Frankl is this whole search for meaning as the ultimate motivation in human life, so on. Um, and then the Jeremy Bentham and वो क्या नाम है उसका J.S. Mill stuff of utilitarianism, that kind of lands right into the neoliberal environments in which we live.
Ideology, yes.
And in some ways, the neoliberalism and commodification of land and the garden and so on appears to be linked with excessive control over the land, which is not virtuous if you go back to Aristotle,
Aristotle.
right? And so what's really fascinating is that when you reach gardening and we say, all right, gardening is about virtue and which is about following the middle path, which is about harmony. You link it back with Viktor Frankl, and you can link it back with Aristotle. And you can also say that excessive control is, can clearly link it with the market processes where they're selling great gardens and lawns to the people, right? And commodification of gardening. And at the same time, we can also see a very clear link with learning.
Yes.
Isn't it fascinating? I'm just thinking about it. That, you know, that good teaching is also about virtue, and it is like gardening, and it all goes back to Aristotle as well, and to Viktor Frankl. The whole thing just comes together for me. पता नहीं कैसे, but I don't know if you can also see it like that.
I can see it through you.
That's fascinating. I think on that note we should end this conversation. वो इससे आगे और ये
Yes.
जाएगी नहीं.
Ji sir.
Yeah. And let the students watch it. I mean, the trouble is that I may not even be able to come on this Friday. तो मैं ये चाहता हूँ कि वो पहले देख लें हमारी इस कॉन्वर्सेशन का. आई होप दैट वी आर एबल टू गेट द recording here and then I can turn that into a video as well. Um, and they should look at it, and then during the session we can have them, or maybe have them look at it during the session. Don't you think that would be better? Because I don't think it's going to be more than an hour. It should be less than that. And
Yes.
then, invite some questions, and then we can have group conversations as well. And maybe this is something that they need to understand, this whole idea of the golden mean, because if we don't find it, then we continue to do this violence. अगर हम माली हैं या द सो कॉल्ड माली हैं, तो वो हम वी आर डूइंग दैट वायलेंस टू द लैंड. अगर हम पॉलिटिशियंस हैं तो वी आर डूइंग वायलेंस टू द सोसाइटी. अगर हम टीचर्स हैं तो वी आर
Society.
डूइंग वायलेंस टू आवर स्टूडेंट्स. I mean, this is a very wholesome idea to think about and meditate on. And so that's why I didn't want to stop the recording at that point
Okay.
as well. अब बंद कर देते हैं इसको.